The first time I heard Daniel's voice in years, it wasn't from a phone call. It was from a voicemail I didn't mean to play. "Olivia, we need to talk. It's about the kids." The moment his voice filled my kitchen, every muscle in my body locked. I stood there, coffee growing cold on the marble counter, silk blouse sticking to my skin, and stared at the sunlight bleeding through the blinds. It had been 12 years since I'd walked out of that house, the one built on love and surveillance. The one where silence was a crime and affection came with conditions. I should have deleted that message right away, but something in his tone, that same calm, controlling softness, pulled me backward in time. He said it the way he used to say everything, like a rule dressed up as concern. Outside my window, the city buzzed, cars honking, people rushing, a soundtrack to the life I rebuilt piece by piece. But his words cut through it all. The kids, I hadn't spoken to them in months. They'd grown into adults who still measured truth by loyalty to him. And suddenly, standing there in my perfect, peaceful apartment, I realized, no matter how far I'd come, Daniel still found a way to make me feel small, with just one word. That's when I knew love shouldn't sound like a command. There was a time when Daniel's voice didn't scare me. Back then, it sounded like safety, steady, certain, the kind of tone that made me believe he knew what was best for all of us. I was 24 when I married him, bright-eyed, patient, convinced that love meant trust. He was older, charming, respected, the kind of man who people said was born to lead. And I followed. For years, I tried to make our house feel warm. Candles on the table, family dinners, bedtime stories for Ethan and Sophie. But slowly, warmth turned into watchfulness. Daniel had this rule: we tell the truth here, no secrets. It sounded noble, almost loving, until I realized the truth he wanted wasn't honesty. It was obedience. He'd ask the kids questions like, "Did Mommy say anything about Daddy today?" At first, I thought it was a joke, a playful family game. But when Sophie, only 8, whispered something I'd said in confidence, and he smiled with approval, something inside me cracked. I remember the night I confronted him. My voice shook as I asked, "Why are you teaching them to spy on me?" He didn't yell. He never did. He just looked at me, calm, unblinking, and said, "I'm teaching them to be honest. That's how love survives, Olivia." I wanted to scream, but my throat betrayed me. My hands trembled so hard I had to hide them under the table. Later that night, I found Sophie crying in her room, clutching a drawing of all of us smiling, a picture I couldn't recognize anymore. That's when I opened the drawer of my bedside table and found the small silver bracelet my mother had given me years ago. It had one word engraved inside: truth. I traced the letters with my thumb until they burned into my skin. And in that quiet, broken moment, I made a promise I didn't fully understand yet. That one day, I would show my children what truth really looked like. Not the kind that punishes, the kind that frees. Leaving Daniel wasn't cinematic. There were no grand confrontations or heroic speeches. There was just a suitcase, a worn-out backpack for the kids, and the quiet hum of my old sedan as I drove away from the house that had held more fear than love. The first months were brutal. Nights stretched endlessly while Sophie and Ethan slept in our cramped apartment. I worked at a small publishing firm during the day, long hours, learning every task twice as fast because mistakes weren't an option. At night, I studied marketing, business strategy, even financial planning. I wanted to build something unshakable, something no one could take away. That's when I met Clara Benson, a seasoned editor who had taken me under her wing. Clara was sharp, exacting, but kind. She saw my potential when I couldn't see it myself. "Olivia," she said one afternoon as we went over a manuscript, "you're afraid of being seen. But the world will notice you whether you hide or not. You might as well let them admire what you're capable of." I listened, scribbling notes on the margins of my notebook. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the bracelet my mother had given me, the one that reminded me that truth was freedom. I realized freedom wasn't just leaving Daniel. Freedom was building a life so fully mine that no one could ever control me again. The first win came quietly, a small client who trusted me with their campaign. The second, bigger and more thrilling, my first profitable contract that allowed me to hire an assistant. Every little success felt like a secret rebellion. I didn't post it online. I didn't call Daniel. I simply breathed a little easier, feeling the weight of their rules lift from my shoulders. I stayed up late sometimes, scrolling through photos of my old life, and I noticed Ethan's school awards, Sophie's dance recital pictures, each one tinged with guilt. But I refused to let their loyalty to Daniel define them anymore. I had to show them that love didn't require betrayal. Years passed. Slowly, steadily, the business grew. I invested in small startups, diversified my portfolio, and even took a course in interior design, turning my apartment into a haven that reflected my taste, not his. I started dressing not for approval, but for myself. Silk blouses in soft creams, earrings I loved, shoes I could walk miles in without pain. Every night, as I closed my laptop and glanced at the silver bracelet around my wrist, I whispered, "They raised us to snitch for love. I'm learning to rise for freedom." And for the first time, I knew that I was no longer running. I was arriving, quietly, surely, and fully. The knock on my door came at exactly 4:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened it, there they stood, Daniel, Ethan, and Sophie, all three framed against the fading light of my hallway. Daniel's eyes, still sharp and calculating, flicked around the apartment, taking in every detail as if he were reading a report. The kids looked nervous, glancing at each other, as if silently asking who would break first. "Olivia," Daniel said, his voice carefully even. We thought we should visit." I stepped aside, letting them in, my heels clicking softly against the polished wood floor. The apartment smelled faintly of jasmine, a candle burning in the corner. Minimalist furniture, walls decorated with abstract paintings I'd collected over years, and on the console, the silver bracelet glinting under the afternoon sun. They froze, their eyes taking in the space. Not a word was spoken. I poured 3 glasses of sparkling water and handed them over, my voice calm, steady. "Sit," I said, nodding toward the living room. "I imagine you expected something different." Daniel's jaw tightened. "What do you mean?" he asked, though I already knew the answer. I walked slowly to the window, tracing my fingers along the frame, letting the tension stretch just a little longer. "I mean that the woman you left behind, the one you assumed would struggle, is not struggling anymore." Ethan's eyes widened. Sophie's hand went to her mouth. Daniel's gaze sharpened. I turned, finally letting them really see me. The business card on the coffee table wasn't just a card, it was proof. CEO. Owner. Net worth figures Daniel had never imagined me reaching. My office space, carefully curated to reflect my journey, spoke louder than words ever could. "I run my own company," I said, my voice even but full of weight. "A publishing firm that owns 3 smaller startups. I've invested, expanded, and yes, I've done it without your guidance, without your approval." Daniel swallowed. Ethan blinked rapidly. Sophie's eyes glistened, a mixture of awe and shame washing over her. You're serious?" Daniel asked, his voice catching. I nodded, smiling softly, letting the silence settle. "I didn't need to snitch for love, Daniel. I didn't need anyone to define my worth. And I certainly didn't need anyone teaching my children that obedience equals affection. I taught myself truth, independence, freedom." Sophie's hand found mine. "Mom, I had no idea." Ethan stayed quiet, staring at the floor. Daniel's face hardened for a moment, then crumpled, just slightly, as the reality sank in. I let them take it all in. I didn't have to shout. I didn't have to argue. Their shock, their disbelief, their guilt, it was all mine to witness now. Finally, I said, softly but firmly, "You raised us to snitch for love. I raised myself to speak for truth." I let the room breathe for a moment, watching Daniel, Ethan, and Sophie process everything. For the first time in years, the power in this house, my house, wasn't his. It was mine. Quiet, undeniable, and steady. I sat down on the edge of the sofa, letting my gaze move from Daniel to the kids. We need to be honest with each other, I said. Not the kind of honesty Daniel demanded, the kind that punished disobedience, but real honesty, the kind that heals. Turning to Ethan, I continued, you've learned loyalty means reporting, not protecting. That stops now. I want you to start taking responsibility for your own choices. That includes apologizing when you've hurt someone, without excuses. He nodded slowly, shame and relief warring across his face. Sophie looked at me, with tears glistening. And me. You need to learn that love isn't conditional, I said softly, taking her hand. It isn't a tool to get approval. You don't have to betray your own feelings to be loved. Start by being honest with yourself, then with others. Finally, I faced Daniel. His face was unreadable, but I could see the tension coiling in his jaw. You, I said, my tone calm but sharp, need to recognize the damage your control caused. It's not enough to apologize to me or the kids. You have to stop defining love as power. You need to seek help, understand your behavior, and respect boundaries. Only then can any relationship move forward. Daniel opened his mouth, likely to argue, but I raised a hand. This isn't negotiable. I'm not asking for gratitude. I'm asking for change. I could see the weight of the words settle over the room. It was heavy, uncomfortable, exactly as it should be. Then I smiled, just slightly, letting warmth thread through the authority. I care about all of you, but I will not bend to old patterns. I will not let fear or manipulation define our lives. You can choose growth, or you can walk away. Silence hung in the air. I let it linger. This wasn't about revenge. It was about teaching them that love and respect go hand in hand. I knew this moment would be remembered for years. Not as the time I humiliated them, but as the time I gave them a chance to be better, to break the cycle. Finally, Daniel muttered something under his breath, and I didn't need to hear it to know the shift had begun. Ethan squeezed Sophie's hand, a small gesture of solidarity. And I realized, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just free from his rules. I was free to guide change, not through control, but through truth, boundaries, and love that didn't demand betrayal. Months passed. The apartment felt lighter, the air less tense. Ethan started calling on his own, sharing stories of small victories, learning to apologize without hesitation, taking responsibility at work, even volunteering to help someone without waiting to be asked. Sophie began therapy and slowly rebuilt her sense of self. Her laughter became more genuine, the warmth in her eyes returning after years of careful measurement. Daniel, he changed too, though in slower, quieter ways. I didn't expect miracles overnight, but I noticed small shifts, his tone softer when he spoke to the kids, the absence of commands disguised as concern. He had begun confronting himself, and that was enough for me. I often sat by the window at night, my bracelet glinting in the soft lamplight. The silver reminded me of the promise I had made to myself all those years ago, that truth would always return home. And now it did. One evening, Sophie brought the bracelet to me. "Mom, I want to wear this," she said, her eyes wide and sincere. I smiled, fastening it around her wrist. "May you never confuse truth with obedience," I whispered. And as I watched them slowly step into lives defined by their own choices, not by fear, not by loyalty to control, I felt a peace I had never known. A life built on love, honesty, and respect wasn't easy. It demanded patience, courage, and sometimes heartbreak. But it was real. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside. The years of pain, the tears, the sleepless nights, all of it had carved this moment, a life I could finally call mine. And in that stillness, I realized, love shouldn't hurt. And if it demands betrayal to survive, it was never love at all. I opened my eyes, smiling softly. Freedom wasn't just about leaving the past behind. It was about building a future where truth, respect, and self-respect guided every step. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving, fully, fiercely, and unshakably.